On a hot summer night in South Carolina, something happened that would change everything. But this story doesn't start there. It starts 3 weeks earlier, in a completely different state, with a young man nobody suspected. July 15th, 2004. Winston-Salem, North Carolina. A convenience store. The kind of place where people stop to buy snacks or fill up their gas tanks. Christopher Jason Boggs was working the night shift. He was just a clerk, doing his job, helping customers. It was supposed to be a normal night. It wasn't. Someone walked into that store. Someone who seemed ordinary. Just another customer. But within minutes, Christopher would be dead. Shot. Gone. Just like that. The killer disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind questions that nobody could answer yet. Who did this? Why? Where did they go? If you want to find out what happens next in this shocking true story, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling me what you think happened. Your theories might surprise you. 3 days passed. 3 quiet days where nobody connected the dots yet. The police in North Carolina were investigating. They had a crime scene. They had evidence. But they didn't have their suspect. Not yet. July 18th, 2004. Orangeburg, South Carolina. A different state. A different city. Officer James Myers wasn't on duty that night. He was just a regular person, off work, living his life. He was a police officer, yes, but that night he wasn't wearing his uniform. He wasn't patrolling the streets. He was just existing. Then he met someone. A young man, 21 years old. His name was Mikal Mahdi. What happened next would shock the entire community. Officer Myers was killed. Shot dead. An off-duty police officer, murdered in cold blood. The news spread like wildfire. Police departments take these things seriously. Very seriously. When one of their own falls, they don't rest until they find answers. But here's where things get strange. The investigation into Officer Myers' death started moving fast. Too fast for a normal case. Detectives were working around the clock. They had leads. They had evidence. And they had a suspect, Mikal Mahdi. But as they dug deeper into who Mikal was, they found something unexpected. He'd been in North Carolina just 3 days earlier. Wait, North Carolina? Winston-Salem? That convenience store murder? The pieces started falling into place like a horrible puzzle. 2 murders. 3 days apart. 2 different states. And one young man connected to both. But investigators suspected there might be even more. Whispers started circulating about a third victim. Someone in Virginia. A drug deal gone wrong. A man named Greg Jones. 3 possible victims. 3 different states. All within weeks of each other. Who was Mikal Mahdi? How does someone so young end up connected to so much violence? Let me know in the comments what you think drove someone to do this. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now because this story gets even more unbelievable. The police arrested Mikal Mahdi. They charged him with murder. The evidence was strong. Witnesses placed him at the scenes. Physical evidence tied him to the crimes. The case seemed solid. Open and shut, as they say. But every story has layers. Every person has a history. And Mikal's history was darker than anyone realized. He was born into chaos. His childhood wasn't filled with birthday parties and family vacations. It was filled with things no child should ever experience. Abuse, trauma, violence. The kind of things that break a person from the inside out. By the time he was a teenager, Mikal had already spent time in juvenile detention. Not just a few days. Real time. And much of it was spent in solitary confinement. Alone. Isolated. Hour after hour. Day after day. With nothing but his own thoughts and his own pain. Mental health experts would later say that this kind of isolation does something to a young brain. It changes how a person thinks. How they process emotions. How they see the world. Mikal wasn't getting help. He was getting punishment. And punishment doesn't fix broken people. It just breaks them more. But none of this excused what happened to Christopher Boggs. Or Officer James Myers. Or possibly Greg Jones. Victims don't care about the killer's sob story. Their families don't find comfort in explanations about trauma and mental illness. They want justice. The trial came. Evidence was presented. Testimonies were given. The jury deliberated. And when they returned, their decision was clear: guilty. But guilty of murder doesn't automatically mean death. The prosecution wanted more than just a conviction. They wanted the ultimate punishment. They wanted Mikal Mahdi to die for what he'd done. The same jury that found him guilty had to make another decision. Should this 21-year-old man live in prison for the rest of his life? Or should he die? They chose death. Mikal Mahdi was sentenced to death row. He would join the dozens of other condemned prisoners in South Carolina, waiting for their turn to face execution. Some wait years, some wait decades. The appeals process in death penalty cases is long and complicated. Lawyers file motion after motion. Courts review and review again. Mikal waited. Years passed. His case went through the appeals system. Over and over, courts examined the evidence, the trial, the sentence. Over and over, they upheld it. Then something changed in South Carolina. For years, the state had struggled to carry out executions. Lethal injection drugs became hard to get. Companies that made these drugs didn't want to be associated with executions anymore. They stopped selling to prisons. South Carolina's supply ran out. Executions stopped. Death row inmates waited, but nothing happened. The death chamber stayed empty until the state made a decision that would bring everything back. They passed a new law, a law that brought back old methods of execution, methods that most people thought belonged in history books, not modern prisons. The electric chair and the firing squad. Suddenly, Mikal Mahdi and every other person on South Carolina's death row had to make an impossible choice. How do you want to die? Imagine being told you have to choose how you'll die. Not if, not when exactly, but how. Electric chair, lethal injection, firing squad. These weren't options in a horror movie. These were real choices that Mikal Mahdi had to make. And he had to make one. The electric chair has a reputation. People call it Old Sparky in some states. It's been used for over 100 years. The condemned person sits in a wooden chair. Electrodes are attached to their head and leg. Then electricity shoots through their body. High voltage, thousands of volts. The idea is that death comes quickly, but history tells a different story. There have been cases where it took multiple jolts, where smoke rose from bodies, where executions went horribly wrong. Mikal knew this. Everyone on death row knew this. Lethal injection sounds more medical, more humane, like falling asleep. That's what people imagine. But the reality is more complicated. The state uses a combination of drugs. First, one to make you unconscious, then one to paralyze your muscles. Finally, one to stop your heart. When it works correctly, you supposedly feel nothing. But there have been botched lethal injections too. Cases where the foreline failed, where the drugs didn't work right, where people gasped and struggled for air for minutes. South Carolina had another problem with lethal injection. They couldn't get the drugs anymore. So even if Mikal chose it, there was no guarantee when or if it would happen. That left the firing squad. Most people think firing squads are something from old Western movies or war movies, not something that happens in America in the 21st century. But South Carolina brought it back. They built a special chamber for it. They trained correctional officers to be the shooters. They made it real. Drop a comment below and tell me which method you think is most humane. This is a question that's harder to answer than you might think. The way a firing squad works is specific. The condemned person is strapped into a chair facing a wall. A hood is placed over their head. A target is pinned to their chest, right over their heart. Behind a wall with a slot cut into it, 3 rifles are positioned. 3 trained shooters stand ready. They aim at the target. On command, they fire simultaneously. 3 bullets. 3 shooters. Quick death. That's the theory, anyway. In 2024, South Carolina used the firing squad for the first time in over a decade. A man named Richard Moore was executed this way. According to official reports, it was fast, clean, effective. He was pronounced dead within minutes. Mikal Mahdi heard about that execution. He was still on death row when it happened. He would have heard the other inmates talking about it, wondering about it, fearing it. When the time came for Mikal to choose, he picked the firing squad. His lawyers later said he called it the lesser of 3 evils. He didn't want the electric chair. He didn't trust lethal injection. So he chose bullets. His execution date was set, April 11, 2025. The appeals continued right up until the end. Mikal's lawyers tried everything. They argued that his childhood trauma should matter, that his brain had been damaged by abuse and isolation, that executing him was cruel and unusual punishment, that he deserved life in prison, not death. The courts disagreed. One by one, the appeals were denied. On April 7, 2025, just 4 days before the scheduled execution, the South Carolina Supreme Court made its final decision. The execution would go forward. Mikal's last hope was the governor. In South Carolina, the governor has the power to grant clemency, to reduce a death sentence to life in prison, to show mercy. Governor Henry McMaster received the clemency petition. He reviewed it. He considered it. He said no. April 11th arrived. Inside the prison, preparations had been made. The execution chamber was ready. The 3 shooters were positioned. Everything was checked and double-checked. Outside, some people protested. Others supported the execution. Officer Meyer's family wanted justice. They wanted this day to come. Mikal was given his last meal. He was allowed to speak with his lawyers one final time. He could make final phone calls, say final goodbyes. These are the rituals of death row, the last moments of a condemned person's life. At 6:01 p.m., Mikal Mahdi was strapped into the chair in the execution chamber. A target was placed over his heart. A hood was pulled over his head. He couldn't see the rifles. He couldn't see the shooters. He could only wait in darkness for what came next. The warden gave the signal. 3 shots rang out. The sound echoed through the chamber, through the prison. Witnesses watched from behind glass. Some looked away. Some kept watching. This was justice, they told themselves. This was what the law demanded. For minutes later, at 6:05 p.m., Mikal Mahdi was pronounced dead. It seemed like it was over. Quick, just like it was supposed to be. The witnesses filed out. The prison officials completed their paperwork. The news media reported that South Carolina had carried out its second firing squad execution. Everything appeared to have gone according to plan. Officer Meyer's family could finally have closure. The man who killed their loved one was gone. Justice was served. But something was wrong. Nobody knew it yet. Not the witnesses. Not the prison officials. Not the family members. Not the media. But something had gone very, very wrong in that execution chamber. It would take weeks before the truth came out. Weeks before an autopsy revealed what really happened in those 4 minutes. Weeks before people understood that this quick and clean execution was anything but. The truth was hidden inside Mikal Mahdi's body. And when pathologists finally uncovered it, the whole country would be talking about what happened in South Carolina on April 11th, 2025. Because firing squad executions are supposed to be instantaneous. 3 bullets to the heart. Death in seconds. No suffering. That's the whole point. That's why the target goes over the heart. That's why 3 trained shooters fire at the same time. But what if the bullets missed? What if something went wrong? What if those 4 minutes between the shots and the death pronouncement weren't as peaceful as everyone thought? There should have been 3 bullet wounds. 1 from each rifle. All clustered near the heart for maximum effectiveness and minimum suffering. 2 bullets. Not 3. But that wasn't even the worst part. Remember, the whole point of a firing squad is precision. The target goes directly over the heart. 3 trained shooters aim at that target. When the bullets hit the heart, death is supposed to be almost instant. The heart stops pumping. Blood stops flowing to the brain. Consciousness ends within seconds. That's not what happened. The autopsy revealed something disturbing. Neither of the 2 bullets that actually hit Mikal struck his heart directly. They missed. 1 bullet went to the side. The other went slightly off target. His heart kept beating. His brain kept receiving blood and oxygen. He was alive. Conscious. Aware. But how long? That's the question that haunted the pathologists. How long did Mikal Mahdi remain conscious after those shots rang out? How long did he suffer? Their conclusion: Mikal Mahdi remained conscious for approximately 80 seconds after being shot. 80 seconds doesn't sound like a long time. It's barely over a minute. You could hold your breath for 80 seconds. You could count to 80 and be done. But imagine 80 seconds of agony. 80 seconds knowing you've been shot. 80 seconds of pain and terror and confusion. 80 seconds that feel like an eternity. The pathologists went further. They estimated how long Mikal experienced actual pain before shock and blood loss finally made him lose consciousness. Their estimate: 30 to 60 seconds of conscious pain. This wasn't supposed to happen. This was exactly what the firing squad method was designed to prevent. Quick, clean, humane. Those were the promises. But the autopsy showed that Mikal's execution was none of those things. There was more evidence. Witnesses who had been in the observation room that day were interviewed after the autopsy results came out. Some of them had seen things, heard things that made sense now with the new information. According to witness accounts, Mikal didn't die silently. After the shots were fired, he cried out. He made sounds, groaning, moaning. The witnesses heard him through the glass. They saw his body react. This wasn't the instant death everyone expected to see. One witness described hearing what sounded like crying or whimpering. Another said they saw movement, struggling against the restraints. These weren't the peaceful final moments of someone who died instantly. The witnesses thought maybe they were imagining things. Maybe it was just muscle reflexes. Bodies do strange things after death sometimes. Nerves fire. Muscles twitch. It doesn't mean the person is conscious or suffering. But now they knew the truth. Mikal had been conscious. He had been aware. Those sounds were real. That movement was real. He was dying, but he wasn't dead yet. The news broke in late May 2025. Headlines across the country reported the botched execution. Death penalty opponents called it cruel and unusual punishment. They said it proved that firing squads weren't humane at all. They demanded South Carolina stop using this method. Supporters of the death penalty were divided. Some said mistakes happened, but that doesn't mean the method is wrong. They pointed out that Mikal Mahdi had killed people himself. He had caused suffering. Why should his suffering matter more than his victim's suffering? Others, even some who supported capital punishment, admitted this was troubling. If the state is going to execute people, it should be done correctly. Botched executions undermine public confidence in the justice system. They make executions seem barbaric rather than just. What do you think? Was this execution justice or cruelty? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Several theories emerged. Theory 1. One shooter deliberately missed. In some firing squad executions, one rifle is loaded with a blank. The shooters don't know which one has the blank. This gives each shooter the psychological comfort of thinking maybe they weren't the one who killed the person. Maybe their rifle was the one with the blank. But South Carolina's protocol didn't use blanks. All 3 rifles had live ammunition. So either this didn't apply, or one shooter chose not to fire, which would be against protocol. Theory 2. The shooters weren't properly trained. Shooting a target in a controlled environment is different from shooting a living, breathing human being strapped to a chair. Even trained professionals can have their aim affected by stress, nerves, or moral conflict. Maybe one or more shooters hesitated. Maybe their hands shook. Maybe their aim was off. Theory 3. The target placement was wrong. If the target wasn't positioned correctly over Mikal's heart, even perfect shots to the target would miss the vital organ. Someone might have made a measurement error. Human error in a system that demands perfection. Theory 4. Mikal moved. Even strapped down, even hooded, a person can still move slightly. If Mikal flinched or shifted at the wrong moment, that could throw off the shooter's aim just enough to matter. The truth is, we may never know exactly what went wrong. The state of South Carolina didn't release many details. The shooters' identities were kept secret. No official investigation was announced. The state simply moved forward. But the damage was done. Trust in the firing squad method was shaken. People who had believed it was more humane than lethal injection or the electric chair now had doubts. The image of Mikal Mahdi suffering for over a minute while bleeding out haunted the public imagination. Anti-death penalty activists used this case in their arguments. They said it proved that there is no truly humane way to execute someone. Every method has the potential to go wrong. Every method can cause unnecessary suffering. They called for an end to capital punishment entirely. The families of victims faced a different kind of pain. Officer Meyer's family had waited years for justice. They had waited through appeals and delays. They had finally gotten their day. The man who killed their loved one was dead. But instead of closure, they got controversy. Instead of peace, they got headlines about botched executions and suffering. Did they care that Mikal suffered? Some victim families say yes. They wanted the killer to suffer just like their loved one suffered. Eye for an eye. Others say no. They wanted justice, not revenge. They wanted the execution to be quick and professional, not messy and prolonged. Christopher Boggs' family in North Carolina probably felt the same way. Another life cut short. Another family left with an empty chair at the table. Another group of people who would never fully heal from their loss. And what about Mikal's family? Did he have people who loved him despite what he'd done? Did he have a mother who cried for her son? Siblings who remembered the little boy he used to be before the abuse and trauma twisted him into someone capable of murder? The records show that Mikal had a troubled childhood. Abuse, neglect, violence. He wasn't born a killer. Something, or many things, made him one. Does that excuse his crimes? Absolutely not. Does it make his execution more complicated morally? Maybe. The story of Mikal Mahdi raises questions that don't have easy answers. Questions that Americans have been arguing about for decades. Questions that divided the country long before April 11th, 2025, and will continue to divide it long after. Should we execute people at all? And if we do, how should we do it? Let's look at the bigger picture. South Carolina isn't alone in struggling with executions. States across America have faced similar problems. Lethal injection drugs became impossible to get. Pharmaceutical companies refused to sell them for executions. Some states stopped executing people altogether. Others, like South Carolina, brought back older methods. Oklahoma uses nitrogen gas now. They put a mask over the condemned person's face and replace the oxygen with pure nitrogen. The person supposedly just falls unconscious and dies peacefully. But the first nitrogen execution in January 2024 didn't go smoothly either. Witnesses reported the person convulsing and gasping for air for several minutes. Utah kept the firing squad as an option for years before abandoning it. Now South Carolina has brought it back. Other states are watching closely. Will they follow South Carolina's lead? Or will Mikal Mahdi's botched execution convince them to find different solutions? Here's something most people don't realize. Botched executions aren't rare. They happen more often than you'd think. Since 1890, there have been hundreds of documented cases where executions went wrong. Electric chair malfunctions, lethal injection failures, hanging miscalculations, gas chamber horrors. In 1983, a man in Alabama was electrocuted 3 times over 14 minutes before he finally died. Witnesses said they smelled burning flesh. In 2014, an Oklahoma lethal injection took 43 minutes. The man writhed and clenched his teeth the whole time. In 1999, a Florida electric chair caught fire during an execution. These aren't ancient history. These happened in our lifetime. In modern America, with modern technology and medical knowledge. And they keep happening. Why? Because killing someone humanely is harder than it sounds. The human body wants to live. It fights to survive. Even when we try to shut it down quickly and painlessly, things go wrong. Equipment fails. Procedures aren't followed correctly. Human error creeps in. Some doctors and medical professionals refuse to participate in executions. They say it violates their oath to do no harm. So states have to use non-medical personnel, correctional officers, volunteers, people who might not have the training or expertise to handle complications. This brings us back to Mikal Mahdi and that execution chamber on April 11th. 3 shooters, 3 rifles, 1 target, 2 hits, 0 heart shots, 80 seconds of consciousness, 30 to 60 seconds of pain. Could this happen again? Absolutely. Will it happen again? Probably. As long as humans are involved in executions, mistakes will be made. The question is whether we're willing to accept those mistakes as the cost of capital punishment. Let's talk about what happened after the autopsy results became public. Lawyers for other death row inmates in South Carolina filed emergency motions. They argued that the firing squad was cruel and unusual punishment. They pointed to Mikal's botched execution as proof. They demanded their clients be allowed to choose different methods or have their executions delayed until the state could guarantee a humane process. The courts mostly rejected these arguments. They said one botched execution didn't prove the method itself was unconstitutional. They said problems can occur with any execution method. They said the inmates still had to face their sentences. But something interesting happened in public opinion. Polls showed that support for the death penalty in South Carolina dropped slightly after the Mahdi execution. Not dramatically, not enough to change laws, but enough to notice. Some people who had supported capital punishment started questioning whether it was worth it. Think about the costs. Not just moral costs, but actual financial costs. Death penalty cases are expensive, really expensive. The trials cost more because of the higher stakes. The appeals process costs more because it goes on for years, sometimes decades. Housing death row inmates costs more than housing regular prisoners. The execution itself costs money, building chambers, training personnel, buying equipment. Some studies suggest it costs more to execute someone than to keep them in prison for life without parole. That surprises people. They assume execution is cheaper. It's not. Not when you factor in everything. So why do we still do it? Different people give different answers. Some say it's about justice. Eye for an eye. You take a life, you forfeit your own life. It's fair. It's proportional. It's what victims' families deserve. Others say it's about deterrence. If people know they might be executed for murder, maybe they won't commit murder. Maybe it saves lives by preventing future crimes. The research on deterrence is mixed. Some studies say the death penalty doesn't deter crime any better than life in prison. Other studies suggest it might have a small deterrent effect. Nobody can agree. The data is complicated and depends on how you analyze it. Then there are people who oppose the death penalty entirely. They say it's morally wrong for the state to kill people. They say innocent people have been executed. They say it's applied unfairly, that poor people and minorities are more likely to get death sentences than wealthy white defendants who commit similar crimes. And they're not wrong about the innocent people part. Since 1973, more than 190 people have been released from death row after being proven innocent. 190 human beings who came within days, sometimes hours, of being executed for crimes they didn't commit. DNA evidence saved many of them. Better legal representation saved others. Pure luck saved some. If we've wrongly convicted 190 people we know about, how many have we wrongly executed? We'll never know for sure. Dead men can't be exonerated. Mikal Mahdi wasn't innocent. The evidence against him was strong. Multiple crimes, multiple victims, witnesses, physical evidence. He did what he was accused of doing. His execution wasn't a miscarriage of justice in that sense. But the way he died raises different justice questions. On June 3, 2025, about 2 months after Mikal's execution, South Carolina announced changes to its firing squad protocol. They didn't abandon the method, but they implemented new training requirements for shooters. More target practice, more psychological evaluation, better quality control on equipment and procedures. Will these changes prevent another botched execution? Maybe, maybe not. The state seemed confident. Critics remained skeptical. Time will tell. As of now, South Carolina continues to offer the firing squad as an execution option. Other inmates have chosen it. More executions are scheduled. Each one carries the same risks. Each one could go smoothly or could go horribly wrong. Officer James Myers never got to see his family grow up. He never got to retire. He never got to grow old. Christopher Boggs never got another shift at that convenience store. Never got to pursue his dreams. Their lives ended suddenly, violently, at the hands of a young man who made terrible choices. Mikal Mahdi spent over 20 years on death row. 20 years waiting to die. 20 years in a small cell. 20 years of appeals and hope and despair. Then one April evening, he was strapped to a chair and shot. And for 80 seconds, he knew he was dying. For 30 to 60 seconds, he felt pain. Then nothing. Is that justice? Is that revenge? Is that closure? Is that cruelty? The answer depends on who you ask. And that's perhaps the most important thing to understand about the death penalty in America. There are no simple answers. Just complicated questions, deeply held beliefs, and consequences that ripple out far beyond the execution chamber. 3 people died in this story. 3 families lost someone they loved. 3 lives ended too soon. 1 by execution, designed by the state, witnessed by officials, and later revealed to have gone terribly wrong. 2 by murder, sudden and violent and senseless. All 3 deaths were tragedies. All 3 leave us with questions. About justice. About mercy. About what we owe to victims and what we owe to the condemned. About whether a society can kill its way to peace. These questions don't go away when the execution is over. They linger. They haunt. They challenge us to think harder about what justice really means. The execution chamber in South Carolina is ready for its next use. The rifles are cleaned and stored. The chair waits empty. Somewhere on death row, another inmate counts down the days, knowing their turn is coming, knowing they'll have to make the same impossible choice Mikal made. And somewhere, families of victims wait for closure that never quite comes, no matter how many executions they witness. The story of Mikal Mahdi is over. But the larger story, the story of capital punishment in America, continues. It continues in courtrooms and prisons, in protests and debates, in the hearts of those who support it and those who oppose it. And it continues every time someone asks the question that has no easy answer: is this justice?